Hey, what's going on, everybody? You're listening to the SANE Show, the show about nothing and everything. I'm your host, Cliff, and today I have a good friend, a really special guest as well. He's John Maxwell certified. Yes, John Maxwell certified, and he's a director at Whip Around. I have Jacob Ciccarelli joining us today. How you doing, Jake?
I'm good. No complaints. Thanks for having me, Cliff.
I'm so excited to have you on. As you know, I respect you a whole lot and think really highly of you. And I couldn't be happier to have you on the show today to have this exciting conversation that we're going to have and to share all this insight that you have as a great leader with everybody that's going to be listening to this today. So really quick, before I introduce the topics, I want to take and do the shout outs really quick to all the listeners and all of our fans following us on social media as well. Thank you, everybody in all 60 plus countries. Love you guys. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for continuing to like, share, and subscribe and spreading the word about the SANE Show and showing all that love that you guys constantly show us. Be sure if you're listening and you don't already follow us, be sure to check us out on Instagram and Twitter. That's at SANE_show, SANE_show on Instagram and Twitter. And then the SANE Show on Facebook. Again, on Facebook, that's the SANE Show. So today we're going to be talking about don't be a manager. Yes, don't be a manager. Not
Mm,
discouraging anybody not to be in a management position, but we'll go on more into that. Then we're going to also talk about being a team. Following that, we're going to have an interview with you, Jake, so that the listeners can learn more about you, your leadership style, and all the fun things that go along with that. So let's go ahead and hop right into it with don't be a manager. Again, I don't want to confuse anybody and not and not discourage anyone into not going into a management position, but wanting to have the conversation with you, Jake, because again, I think highly of you. I've seen you, we've worked together before, actually. I've seen you in action. I know how you have led a team, even after transitioning out of a company and seeing that team still be successful. And obviously, a hallmark of good leadership. And so, one of the things that comes to mind when we talk about not being a manager, obviously, there's a difference between someone in a management position actually managing something and actually being a leader. And I wanted you to speak to the listeners a little bit about not being a manager, and actually being a leader. And I know you got a lot of insight to offer, so I'm going to go ahead and let you take the floor.
yeah. You know, being a manager, anybody can do that job. And I think when people look at growing themselves in a particular company, people look at the fancy title, and it's easy to do what the title requires one to do, but to actually be a leader, it's really difficult. As you know, leadership is influence, and the ability to influence a leader is oftentimes your own ability to be able to grow and your own openness. So, look, it's not an easy thing to do. You have to really care about people. And I think people are at the core of leadership. And it gets me really excited to talk about this topic because I think right now, more than ever, we need some really good leadership, right? And we need probably less managers. So, really excited about this.
Yeah, yeah. And, obviously, I've worked on teams before as well. And, shout out to Sean Sparks, great manager. Uh, but, one of the things I've understood, because I've been a supervisor before as well, years ago when I was in college. And, one of the things I think about in being an effective leader is understanding the people that you work with, understanding everybody's style. And and then understanding them, you have to get to know them, right? And you have to develop that relationship because now that I'm thinking about it, I'm even thinking about like retention, right? And
Mhm.
being able to keep people, because that's one thing that keeps people apart of organizations is like they feel like the organization has a vested interest in them. And that goes all the way down to the managers, right? Like what are the managers doing to help keep people in the organization, make people feel like the organization cares about their success, their
Mm.
well-being, and all of those kinds of things. What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I mean, the manager plays an important role in any business. My mom sent me a postcard a long time ago when I first started my journey with Fleetmatics, which eventually was sold to Verizon, as you know, and the
Hmm.
rest being history. Eventually, I had the chance to become a people leader. But she sent me this thing, it still sticks with me today. And it said, managers do things right, and leaders do the right things. And so it's
Mm.
important, as a manager, managers, they do the maintaining of things. They administer things usually well, sometimes not. System focused, controlled. Leaders, they look at challenges. They're very people driven and focused. What's inspirational, what's motivating. Usually the strategic thinker versus the manager being more of an operational thinker. They ask
Mm.
what and why. The leader asks what and why, where managers are more kind of how and when. And the leaders are also thinking long term too, which is really needed and important for employees. So hopefully that's some good insight there for you, Clint.
Yeah, you bring up a good point when you say what you just said. Now I'm thinking as far as being reactive and being proactive.
Mm.
And when you talk about the leader, I'm thinking proactive because you're talking about looking down the road. Because I can even think of SANE Show as an example. Last year, or really when the show started, and for probably a year, I was recording with everyone in person. But then when I started recording with certain guests, I had to find a different means to make those recordings happen with guests that were across the country
Mm.
and that I couldn't just, fly out or have them fly here. So I'm like, how can I do this remotely? Fast forward to this year, we're in a pandemic now. People are asking like, how's the show going? Like, are you still able to record? Yeah, I'm doing it remotely. So just that whole thing about, thinking down the road, right? Because again, that's being proactive, like trying to foresee. And obviously, I wasn't thinking about a pandemic, but it just so happened that I was thinking ahead. So when a pandemic happened, I was all right. So
Yeah.
would you say that's a fair assessment to make as far as managers
To-
can, I'm not going to assume, but can tend to be reactive versus a leader being proactive.
Yeah, and the key there is I think managers are very much living in the now. So as that
Mm.
reactive, right? They're driving employees on a day to day. They really depend on the authority of others. Sometimes they use fear-based leadership methods. They know what they need to do, but they're kind of, using people at times a little bit more commanding. They say go, kind of even taking credit where the leader is really thinking of the vision. And because you're being proactive, right? I think proactive being a key word. When you think of the vision, you can't help when you're looking into the future, but thinking of people. And the leader, on the other hand, rather than driving employees, is coaching them. They're generating enthusiasm rather than inspiring fear. They're fixing the breakdown rather than placing the blame for particular breakdowns. They develop people rather than just using them, and they say, let's go rather than just go. So that proactive, when you're looking to the future, your preparedness plan is usually a lot better than the person just living in the now. So I think that's a really good point.
Wow. Just listening to someone else say, honestly, you got me thinking about, again, like just the the great leaders I've been around, because a lot of that stuff is true. And also knowing, again, it just goes back to knowing that you have somebody that's invested in you, and
Mm,
that cares about your success, that's not just here to collect the check and
mm,
hopefully, come in, do the status quo, and at some point hopefully get that promotion and move into that higher position. And being a manager, I'm speaking of,
mm.
versus the leader who's not who wants that, but that's not the concern right now. But again,
Yeah.
in focusing on those little things, because that's something I always like to preach, right? You focus on the small things, and then when the big thing comes, you'll know it'll come because you got all the little things right.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
I
John
mean,
Maxwell
go ahead.
says small disciplines repeated daily equal success, right? And that's
There it is.
consistently over time. Those small things compound. So it's important that we do those.
That's very true. Very true. All right, we're back. Now we're going to talk about being a team. When I put this together, again with you in mind, that was something that you did very well. Again, along with other managers that I've worked with, but again, you specifically because you're my guest. I thought about you. Like you did this. You did this very well. Being having a team that functioned as a unit. I mean, heck, like I said, you departed and your team was still successful months on end. And again, functioned as a unit and understood that you have to keep each other accountable. You have to get the job done still. So we have a new coach come in, and okay, cool. We still, as players, have to perform. And fortunately for your team, you left them with something. And so, wanting to talk to you a little bit about, again, being a team. So if you could give us some of your insight as far as not only being a leader, obviously, but just being a team. What does it mean to be a team, and what are some of the things that go into that?
It's really important when you first start a team. And, I had the privilege right when I had my team and was given a team that not a lot of people had worked with me before, but they knew what I had done from an individual contributor standpoint. So I had an opportunity to create the foundation right at the very beginning. And I think what a lot of teams fail to discover very quickly is what they want their identity to be. And not only the identity that their office sees them, but the rest of the company, the way that their customers see them. So creating that foundation at the very beginning is so important. And there are a few values two that stick out right at the front of mind. I remember when we first started that team, which went off to have some very, very good success, was one, nobody's greater than the team. We really tried to create a team of humility and a team that said, kind of like, I know nothing, and really come to the table and say, I'm not the know it all. I'm going to search for the answer. I'm always hungry to learn. I'm going to be coachable, but nobody is greater than the team. Not one great, no one, not one part. The second piece to that is we are going to commit to becoming better versions of ourselves. And because we do that, we'll see and attain unimaginable results. I just truly believe, and it's because I've seen it just work so well. More than any other thing that I can attribute to any team is when teams consistently and together commit to becoming better versions of themselves, specifically from a personal perspective, that personal development, that growth. If and I always tell people, if everything outside of work is taken care of, when they come to work, they're gonna perform. And if, especially when work is, we're continuing to build on that at work. So personal development is really big. So I really encourage people on our team, and it really starts with me, right? Like I have to be a good leader. I have to maintain qualities of honesty and integrity and delivering things on time and being vulnerable. So I think becoming a better version of yourself, everyone, and maybe that's not every single team, but teams at least have to commit to a particular value or a mantra and say, all right, we're all going to rally around this, and this is how we're going to grow and succeed together, and we'll lose together as well. Becoming better versions of ourselves was key to our success. So, anybody out there with a team, I really recommend focusing on that being the best you. And I don't think it'll really steer you wrong.
You know what? I like what you. I like a lot of everything you said. Really, one of the things I'm thinking about, because you hit something on the head when you said the identity, right? And that's so true, because one of the things, obviously, identity, we that goes along with culture, right? What's the culture of the
Mm,
team? Because now I'm thinking about especially, we talk about some of the great sports teams, UNC Chapel Hill, Duke University basketball, the Patriots under Bill Belichick, even the Panthers when under Ron Rivera. Like these teams had identities, right? Some of them still do have an identity, but when you look at how they play, how they conduct themselves, you can tell, right? Even when people leave, right, you can still see some of that in them, and how that culture, because it goes beyond, is what I'm saying, which is
mm,
a great thing. And I think that's why it's important to have that identity, because when we think about working as a team, it's more than just the work that you do, especially when you start talking about identity. And that's a positive, because now I'm thinking about it, I don't know the science behind it or the psychology behind this, but I just feel like when you're able to work as a team, and you know you have a great practice, you have a great culture, and you have a unified identity, I just feel like it makes things more sticky in terms of the things that the team does, right? The things that, whether again, like with sports, players that develop certain skills or learn certain techniques, like it sticks. I feel like when you have that kind of unity as a team, it's more of a chance that those things are going to stick with players, and even in the business world, professionals outside of being on that team. Those are things that they take with them where they go, which is a positive when you talk about a good team. And obviously, again, I've seen that from people on your team. They take what you've given them, and they've gone elsewhere, and they've had success. And that's
and it
again.
ties so
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I mean everything that you're saying, it ties so much. Sports probably gives us the best example, and I'll direct people first to John Wooden. What a great coach! He said he never coach at UCLA never scouted the other team. He never scouted the other team, and he focused more on process, not the results. And he made basketball. He said, in essence, that it was just a game. Something had to be bigger than the game itself. And he really set that example by being the last person to leave the gym. And he would actually, there was a broom sitting there, and the story goes that he would literally be sweeping the gym while everybody's long and gone. And something had to be bigger than the game itself. And I think for all teams, whether it's a sports team or a sales team or a health related team, whatever type of team you're a part of, if you're not able to tie it into something greater than the work that you're doing right there and then, that's all it will kind of be. So that's why I think that development of self and taking it outside of where we are is so vital to the future success of a team. Hopefully, the success is just a byproduct of all that work that you're putting in.
All right. Now for the interview, I'm going to ask you some questions, Jake, so that the listeners can learn more about your leadership style and all the fun things that go along with that, and get some more great insight. So I'm going to go ahead and fire off with the first question. When empowering your team, you give them a sense of control, and obviously, again, the empowering them to take ownership of a few things. When do you know it's time to step in and get things or keep things on track?
Mm, that's a good one. And anybody that knows me knows that I'm a big fan of autonomy. The question always is how much autonomy is too much or too less. But when consistent habits arise, specifically bad habits, whether it's the person being habitually late or a lack of daily activity or just consistently not hitting their target or goal, right? It's usually that's usually about the time to start intervening. Hopefully, you've developed an awareness, as a leader that helps you discern when correction or discussion is needed before the problem gets too bad. But secondly, hopefully, you also get to know your team individually and in such a way that you know the styles, you know the way they learn. I check in once a week with my team members, and I have a one-on-one format and agenda that helps me kind of gauge them, not only personally, but from a professional perspective. But however, this question always makes me think of there's really two types of managers. And I heard this a long time ago, two types of managers. The first one comes to your desk and they say, you've had 3 months of not hitting your goal. If you don't hit this month, you're fired. The other type of manager, which we'd say obviously is the leader, is 3 months of not hitting your goal. Are you okay? How is everything? Everything all right? And it brings up, when you say empowering your team, the first thing I think of is empathy. Empathy is at the core of empowerment. And it's really the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. The follow up then is, well, how do you get people back on track? Well, you have to support them. Some people need to be encouraged to step away, maybe take time off, but most people really need coaching. And I'm not talking about just coaching, they need authentic coaching. And thankfully, many people before us have had some great ideas on how to coach. Obviously, we have some really good examples of coaching. We already mentioned John Wooden, but one of the ones that I was most attracted to was the GROW model. You familiar with the GROW model, Cliff?
I'm not, please.
So the GROW model by Sir John Whitmore, simply put, it's goal, reality, options, way forward. And once again, goal, reality, options, and way forward. And to break that down, it's what do you want to achieve? Where are you now? What options do you have? And what choice will you make? And following those four things, and as a leader, how can I help them throughout each of those steps? How can I help them through the things that they want to achieve, where they're at, what options they actually have, and then the choices that they're going to make? Whether it's giving them the tools to succeed, checking in more often, connecting them with somebody or resource, you name it. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, how not only when you have to try to discern when to intervene, but also get things back on track.
That was a great response. I definitely like that part about the two different types of managers. The ones like, you don't do this, you're fired, or 3 months check in. How's everything going? That's so true. That's so true, and people can
And
really
I think it's
appreciate that kind of
relatable.
stuff. Yeah, truly, truly. So that's perfect, because it leads into my next question. Obviously, when it comes to leading a team, trust is important. So how do you build trust amongst your team?
First, I'd say you have to give it at the beginning. You can't tell people that they have to earn the trust. You have to trust them, trust that they'll do the job that they've been hired to do, right? First and foremost. Second, I think you have to be, and this is just, and all these go hand in hand. It can't be you do one and you do the other, but you have to be a person of your word. You have to deliver on promises and expectations. There's this thing called the expectation gap I heard of a long time ago, and it's always stuck with me. And it's about experiences and expectations. And then oftentimes people's experience falls short because of the expectation that was set at the very beginning, whether it's too low or too high. So nailing that expectation is really important. So when you say you're going to promise a particular thing, it's really important how you set that expectation and that you follow through on it. Third, you have to set the example. You have to be the most prepared. You have to be the first one to arrive. I mentioned John Wooden. I'll say his name for the third time. He was the last person to leave the building, sweeping the floors. I remember, as an individual contributor, in order to learn the trade, I was trying to be the first person at work all the time. An old mentor of mine always said, winners start at dawn. winter start at dawn. So, you're there, the first person, but the first person to arrive. So you have to set the example. So, so true and so important. And then lastly, I think you have to be honest with them, honest in feedback about where they are, even where the company is. Change is inevitable. It will happen. We've seen it a lot at Verizon and at Fleetmatics. But I think transparency around company initiatives, around changes, it's really key to trust. And I think sometimes some leaders or managers are afraid to be oh so transparent about some of the bigger picture things that are going on in a company because they think, wow, how are they going to take that information? How are they going to process that? So I think you really have to be honest with them. So, and to just recap those, you got to give trust at the beginning. You have to be a person of your word. You have to set the example, and you have to be honest with them.
I you make a great point. One of the things I thought about, it's like with celebrities, when they're transparent and when they show people that they're human, people tend to like them more, no matter what they do. There's people I'm not big fans of them, but because they're transparent and they're honest and they're human and they show that they
Mm,
make mistakes too and that they have flaws just like everybody else, I'm like, you know what? I like this guy. He's a cool guy. He's gone through some things. He's made his mistakes, but hey, he's honest. He's trying to correct. He's trying to do better, and he wants to be a positive influence. So I think about that with leaders in general, and even with
mm,
influencers, right? Like having a level of transparency, letting people know, hey, I'm not. Yes, I'm in this position, but yes, I am human, like you.
yeah.
I go through some of these, like especially when they say I've been there before. I've been through what you've been through.
Mm,
It changes things sometimes. And it's like, okay, this guy really understands me. Again, just going back to that whole empathy thing you were
mm.
talking about. Um,
It's what it's all about.
yeah, yeah. So, how important is morale, and how do you build and maintain it?
Morale, probably one of the trickier things to nail in the culture, but it really is everything. People that know me will know that I say culture is everything. I'll probably say it again, even while I'm trying to answer this. But, it's oftentimes the difference between a huge day and an off day. I mean, we both know that from our sales experience that
Yeah,
it really, I mean, that could totally just change. And if one person's off, it could set the whole team off, right? So, but
yeah,
being in sales, one day can really be the difference between achieving a monthly goal or not. So I think you build morale though by building up others. The first 30 seconds of any conversation, I try to say something encouraging. And that's a John Maxwell philosophy. It's referred to as the 30-second rule. Morale is maintained through the overall culture and momentum. And culture, like I said, is everything. And momentum, well, it often solves 80% of a company's problems. Morale is affected by momentum directly. Morale is often good when you're winning, right?
hmm,
And usually, but when you're losing, it can be really difficult to maintain. So for me personally, I'll look to my faith in times of hardship. So I feel fortunate that I have that to fall back on. But generally speaking, you need to develop a culture that has something to fall back on. And I believe everybody really needs to understand their why. Their why. Simon Sinek wrote a great book about this called Start With Why. And I'll pressure people, and this makes people uncomfortable because I've had to ask myself this: why even wake up in the morning? Why even do the work that I'm supposed to do today? Why do anything more that I'm required to do? There's something that has to drive us. And if a leader can't help those around them discover their own life's purpose within themselves, and as a team, you'll be able to do some pretty special things. So morale is truly maintained when you can get a group of people to believe in themselves and the company that they work for. But companies also have to empower their employees' visions all while effectively communicating theirs. So I hope that helps kind of answer that.
yeah, definitely does.
And
So now, from go
and
ahead.
Yeah, and Cliff, I have one last thought that just kind of peeked in that I think will hopefully drive this thought home even a little bit more because we talk about morale. I think this is really important. I'll usually ask people whose morale is usually when they're down, because of it's never really something inside of work. It's usually a financial problem, a relationship, a bad morning, even just driving to work in traffic. Now, obviously, that's not a problem for many of us right now, but I would ask people if I had a glass in my hand and it was filled 50% with water, I would ask them, do you see it as half full or half empty? And half the room would give me one answer, or half the room would give me another answer. And then I would say, well, how much do you think this cup of water weighs? And people would give me actual weights, like maybe a pound or maybe a couple ounces. But in reality, and this is what I'll bring it back to, is also the absolute weight of the glass doesn't matter. It all depends on how long I hold that glass. If I'm holding it for 1 hour, it's not too heavy. 2 hours, it's getting a little heavier. 4 hours, this is getting pretty freaking heavy. 8 hours, all right, my hand is shaking, right? Hand starts to drop, feels like a ton of bricks by that point. The point is, the longer I hold it, the heavier it feels. This is our negative thoughts. And I remind people it's important to let go of stresses and worries, because the longer we hold on to those things, it only gets heavier on us. And directing people back to their why usually helps them let go of those things sooner than later. So I think that's really important when we talk about morale. That's why I love this why piece. I think that really helps build and maintain morale.
that was great. I know somebody need to hear that. I'm glad you added that for sure.
I'm preaching.
My last question, and this is the one I'm most excited about, and because I'm really interested to hear your response to this. We often say it's business, uh, but doesn't it make it somewhat personal when you become emotionally invested?
The context there is important. And sometimes companies do have to make tough decisions based on the financials of the business. I don't envy CEOs of some of those larger companies right now where they've had to make some difficult decisions on employees based on how COVID-19, for example, has affected their business financially. Now, whether they have the capital or not to retain, that's on the company. But I think, as with anything, tenure makes something certainly feel more personal, right? Just like a relationship, the more emotionally invested you are, the longer the time together, the more painful the breakup, if it ever comes to that. When you've been loyal to a company, you've given years of service to a company, good service, like you've done overtime.
Hmm.
I mean, you've really gone above and beyond, you've contributed. I don't think it's wrong for anyone to feel like it's personal. So certainly, I think it is sometimes, and that really depends on that tenure and what we've done up to that point with that company.
Okay, good response. Good response. Well, yo, this show felt like it flew by, honestly. Um, it really did, and that's kind of rare too. But it was a great time, Jake. I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to come on the SANE Show and to offer such great insight. Really means a lot. And again, it's always a pleasure speaking with you as well.
Yeah, Cliff, I appreciate you having me on. Obviously, anybody knows you knows you're a great man. You're a great leader. I love your work. I listen to it with my wife. And look, like people, especially right now, they really need, they need to hear a lot of the things that you're bringing to the table. So I just want to commend you for all the work that you're doing, for committing to bringing new content all the time. And look, you're doing some great things. So keep on trucking, and really appreciate you having me on.
I really appreciate you for even saying that. It means a lot coming from someone like yourself. I'm, I'm, I don't even know what to say, but I thank you, and thank you again for taking and coming on the SANE Show. And to everybody else listening, be sure again to follow the SANE Show, continue to like, share, subscribe. And you guys are listening to the SANE Show, the show about nothing and everything. And until next time, we're out.